Hello, I'm Rob Lippincott. I'll be your host for this session. I'm a senior advisor here at College Guidance Network, but I've been many things, many jobs in education, including teaching elementary school and graduate school, serving as a senior vice president at PBS, at Discovery Education, and at Pearson. I'm an education reform zealot and an ed tech exec who believes that a central figure in every student's future success is their counselor. So thank you for being with us tonight. Welcome to College Guidance Network Live, CGN Live Career, Skills for Your Future. Last month, we talked about exploring your passions, interests, and aptitudes. If you missed that, you can watch it on that episode on collegeguidancenetwork.com. Tonight, we're looking at skills, employability skills, technical skills, and human skills, the skills you need most for the success of your future. Joining us to discuss skills, to take us through a lot of the jargon and to answer your questions, please welcome Michelle Weise, the founder of Rise in Design and the author of a wonderful book, Long Life Learning, Preparing for Jobs That Don't Even Exist Yet, and Shelly Thome, Director of Exceptional Student Services at Western Maricopa Education Center in Arizona. We're going to be answering your questions throughout the hour. Please use the Q&A button on your Zoom display to submit your questions. We'll also be using the chat box in Zoom. We'd like to get to know our audience a bit, so please go there now to the chat and share with all attendees where you're from, whether you're a student, a family member, or a counselor. And while you do that, I'll start by asking a few questions. I'll start with Michelle. Michelle, very simply, what does the future of work look like?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball, that I could tell you exactly what the jobs are that we need to prepare for in the future. But the future of work essentially looks longer and more turbulent and uncertain than we ever kind of dreamed possible. What's fascinating is that we have a lot of experts on aging and longevity who are now predicting that, the first people to live to be 150 years old have already been born. And whether or not you buy into that, what we do know is that our workers today who are 55 and older are staying in the workforce for far longer than they had ever anticipated, well into their 60s and 70s. And we have been tacking on months of lifespan every single year since the 1840s. And so with that, we can imagine that, if early baby boomers are experiencing 12 job changes by the time they retire, we might have to navigate 20 or 30 job changes to come. And that's a very different kind of model that we're being set up with. We weren't necessarily prepared for this idea of having to constantly learn, earn, because we know that with all of these technological advancements, we're going to need to skill up. We're going to need to reskill. We're going to need to retool ourselves to stay competitive in that labor market. So this is a very different future of work where ongoing skill development is going to become a way of life.
Got it. Thank you. You also talk in the book about how much AI and robots and others are going to influence that and how that will sort of change the job landscape. But in fact, there is something more powerful if we focus on what might be called human skills. What's different about us?
Yeah,
Can you help us understand that?
Yeah. So interestingly, I think if you look at sort of the debates that have sort of raged between higher education and the workforce, you at one point had this idea it's the STEM skills that are going to really win out in the future, right? We need more of these computer science and engineering skills in order to be successful in that future of work. Over time, though, with this proliferation of artificial intelligence, with deep learning, machine learning, we've been seeing that there are certain things that we can relinquish to the robots and computers, and they're just going to do that work far more flawlessly than we could ever do it. So there's over time, over the last few years in particular, as as these sort of future of work conversations have been trending, people have been saying, well, it's actually going to be our uniquely human skills that give us that kind of unique competitive advantage when we are trying to complement the work of the robots or coordinate better with the work of the robots. And these are skills that we're kind of all familiar hearing, creativity, collaboration, emotional intelligence, right? Leadership. And these have enormous value. We as employers, as organizations, we want to hire people who can exercise judgment in highly ambiguous circumstances, right? But at the same time, it's not just human skills alone that will save the day. We actually have to think of it as both and. It's not just STEM or the liberal arts. It's not either or. It is both these kinds of technical and technological skills that we need to marry with these really important human skills. So think of it kind of more like, emotional intelligence. If we think about like a T-shaped learner, it's emotional intelligence in that kind of broad-based category. And then that vertical STEM, that T-STEM is really that kind of, maybe a focus on artificial intelligence or cybersecurity or data analytics, right? We're going to need to have some technical expertise to intervene at the right times when we're coordinating with these machines and computers in our future of work.
Great. Well, let's say I'm a high school student now, and I don't really know what my future is going to be, especially second or third career out there. What can I do now? What can I start doing now to build the human skills, the things you talk about, which are not immutable and certainly not indescribable, but they apply to more than one career.
Yeah, it's a great question because this work can actually start today for every young learner. I think one of the things we have to get into our minds is that our future of work depends on our being a skills translator. We need to learn how to translate our skills into the language of the labor market. So even though every day we're building these deeply transferable skills, we need to reflect on them and understand how these might correspond to those future workforce competencies. So one way to think about it is, as you are working your side hustle at Dunkin' Donuts and, giving out coffee, maybe you're actually realizing that you're really good at being a team player, or you're good at, communicating amidst chaos. Or maybe as you think about reading a novel for your literature course, it's actually really important to think about that act of inhabiting the voice and the mind of a different character, a different being, because you're building those skills of empathy and understanding, and really understanding what it is like to walk in someone else's shoes, and how might that translate into future work, right? Or as you're writing a really long research paper, how are you dividing up that long-term project? Because these are project management skills as you start to divide looming deadlines into smaller pieces of work, right? So how might I translate these skills, even though they might be specific to a certain domain right now, whether it's in literature or physics or whatever I'm studying right now? It's important for us to begin to learn how to translate these skills into the language of a future employer. And that requires, some personal reflection of understanding what skills do I think I'm developing, and also a real kind of connection and cooperation with our faculty members, our instructors, our advisors, to help us understand, help me understand how this might correspond to my future.
Got it. Love it. Thank you. Shelly, I'm going to switch to you and ask you to help us with, because many people have said, oh, you want to prepare for a career, you should go into CTE. What is CTE?
Thanks, Rob. Career Technical Education, CTE for short, is really a way to get a jump start on your future. And it's learning not only the technical skills that Michelle alluded to, things with AI or cybersecurity or much more, but it is embedded in that learning, those employability, professional skills, or what Michelle has referred to as those human skills also. So that's part of the delivery model, to not only learn how to do the skills you want for your job and career, but also to learn those technical and professional skills hand in hand to be successful out in the workforce.
Where do schools, when they go to your school, for instance, where do students go when they graduate from your school? And what different pathways do they have during and after high school?
My goodness, big question. We're very fortunate at the Western Maricopa Education Center, we call WestMAC, is a large overlay career technical education district. So we get the pleasure of working with 14 different districts that come to us. So we cover almost 5,000 square miles now. So you can imagine that our graduates can cover a huge landmass and quite a few career paths. So we have 29 different paths that we train them in, but that's over several hundred different job types that they could do within those career paths. So our graduates have done anything from working for Hawaiian Airlines to owning their own businesses or being a cosmetologist in a small salon or a large chain salon. We have, oh my goodness, nurses, medical assistants, phlebotomists, you can name it. They've got all kinds of things, but really the sky's the limit because they are learning all of those employability skills like communication, problem solving, leadership, along with how to be a hairstylist or an esthetician. And so when they go put their best foot forward in a job interview, and then when they're in the workplace, those skills keep you employed. So they get to really move forward.
That's outstanding. And obviously it's helping them get their first job. But you also have something you call ECAP and something we talked about, or you have discussed a little bit, called discovery meetings, which are intended to help students really figure out what they're interested in and build a pathway, envision their journey to goals, because it may not be clear exactly what they want to be.
That's correct. We're very fortunate that in the state of Arizona, we have ECAPs. Most states have something similar. Ours is an education career action plan that every high school student needs to have this plan that looks at not only high school, but really what they want to do after high school. The easiest way to work it when working with a family and it does require that family involvement, is we kind of like to reverse engineer it and say, what is it you want to do after you finish high school? What kind of career do you want to go into? And that helps us build a plan for what you should be working for in school and the extracurriculars and job experiences you're having. At WestMech, we take it a step further because we are all about career technical education, and we get a chance to sit down with students and their families and talk about the credentials that they're earning with us and the experiences that they're getting and the externships and job shadows and all of that, how that can lead to their path. And we help them plan a path that has flexibility, because as they learn more skills, they might change their mind. Instead of being a phlebotomist, I want to be a nurse. Or maybe after being a phlebotomist, that blood part is not for me, and I want to change into maybe a related field. But we help them look at all the different career paths out there, with that family being a crucial piece of that, because as we've learned from research, the two biggest influences on a student's career path are their counselor and their parents. So we need that family engagement.
So, Michelle, back to you. What Shelly's been talking about, I think, really illuminates the fact that, of course, you can start accumulating even technical and very career relevant skills in high school through not just classes and not the general idea of human skills, but frankly, direct skills. Why do I need a college degree? Do I even need a college degree? Why is training for work versus a college degree? Is that a false choice?
It is. It is. I think it, in terms of just sort of finances, if someone actually can make it through their college experience, they will on average earn $900,000 more in lifetime earnings than a high school graduate. So from a financial perspective, if you can actually make it through and graduate, the outcomes are solid. The challenge that we have in the US is that we have a lot of people who begin school, who begin post-secondary education, but do not finish and do not make it through. So that's where we have a lot of challenges. And so for those folks who maybe haven't been able to complete, or college wasn't for them, we do need far more pathways that are available so that you're not you're not so stuck. And that's where we are today, where we have so many folks who have a high school degree who are not thriving in the labor market. They're not even earning a living wage. And so part of the challenge here is to, one of the things I was just sort of thinking about as Shelly was talking is how important it is early on to get exposure to these different industries that we think we might be interested in, right?
I got it.
I advise a group called Project Basta, and they were looking at about 2,000 first-gen minority learners and their transitions into work. And they found that if they had a high level of exposure to a specific industry, they could double the number of interviews they were eligible for, and they would have a 90% chance more likely to actually get an interview. And then most of them were actually able to get to the next round as well once they had that high level exposure, because you had learned enough to be dangerous. You have a sense of what kind of jargon might be used, right? How you translate your current skills into that into that new language of the work. And it also helps you understand, is this going to be a right fit, right? Am I actually motivated by the right things? Whether it's salary, status, if I'm thinking about these things, does it actually connect to the work that I think I want to do? Because sometimes I think there's a real mismatch between how we think about those elements.
Great. Here's a question. I'm going to pop over to Michelle again. I'm sorry, to Shelly again. Here's a question from during the registration process. One of the audience asked, "I plan to take a gap year. Are there special things to consider in that case?" Shelly, do you even recommend gap years? How do you think about that, and how do you speak about that with students?
That's a wonderful question. A gap year, I would say, depending upon who you talk to, you get a different perspective every time. For me, I think there's sometimes a concern about a loss of educational momentum, that it's really easy in that gap year to fill your time with other responsibilities, full-time work, maybe responsibilities around the household, different things of that nature, and you kind of get out of the habit of learning, that it makes it hard to get back into the school schedule, spend time studying outside of school, and engage in that. That doesn't mean that it's not a possibility for you, but that's the one caution I would have. On the plus side of if you take a gap year, you can get a lot of wonderful life experiences that make you a strong candidate when you're applying for jobs, because you not only can talk in the theoretical side of what you've learned, but maybe talk about some of the things you learned in an entry-level position in that career you're interested in.
Got it. Shelly, maybe I can ask you to go forward and talk a little bit about something else we discussed earlier called employability skills. Employability skills, again, it's not exactly the technical skills that we touched on. It's not exactly the human skills, but how do you describe them and how do you use them at your schools?
Great. Thank you. I love Michelle speaking to it, kind of the human skills and things of that nature. Here we talk a lot of times about professionalism skills or employability skills, very much an overlap with that. Years ago, they used to be called the soft skills compared to technical skills that were called hard skills. And I find that a misnomer in that actually these employability skills are actually sometimes a lot harder to learn, master, and retain than some of the technical skills you'll learn training for a job. So in career technical education, we're very fortunate that through our model of learning, a huge piece focuses on what we consider leadership skills and also employability through our career technical student organizations that are attached to our programs. They're embedded in it. And so during that, they have a chance to take on leadership roles. They practice these employability skills, and we work with them. And in fact, we're very fortunate at WestMech. We actually have created, through a lot of great work and crosswalking state standards in these areas of employability skills, we've created a rubric for our students to be very transparent, to see if I'm kind of just beginning, I'm a novice in this area of critical thinking, or if I'm all the way up to an expert level, and what things really define that learning. Because when we work with our advisory councils that are from industry telling us what they want in their employees when they come to them, they explain these technical skills, these employability skills are more important many times than some of the technical skills they're learning. Their biggest thing is we want someone that's going to show up on time, show up consistently, and has the ability to problem solve and communicate well with others. So the technical skills might be what gets you the job, but those professionalism or employability skills help you retain that job.
Got it. Michelle, you've also talked about something which is really intriguing. It's along the lines of how hard do I work to get what skills and so forth. You call it underemployment. And I'd like you to explore that a little bit with us. What do you mean by underemployment? And what about what you call the cascade effect that has in careers?
Yeah, so underemployment, we may not know the term, but we've seen it in real life where we may have relatives, we may have friends or siblings who've gone off to college, and then they end up in a first job out of college, maybe in a job that we didn't expect for them. They might be selling clothes at Target or the Gap, right? Or, a barista at Starbucks. And we didn't quite imagine that being the first job that they had as they were this kind of newly minted grad. And so underemployment is a newly minted graduate in a bachelor's degree level who's received their diploma in a job that never really required that college degree in the first place. And so uh, I think we tend to assume that, this is a short-term phenomenon. It only affects a small kind of minority of our population. People find their footing relatively quickly, or that's what we assume. But it turns out that almost 43% of when we did an analysis of 2 million unique resumes over a 10-year period, and we looked and saw that 43% of newly minted grads actually started off in a role where it never required that college degree. And they were 5 times more likely to stay underemployed 5 years from that moment. And 75% of that group actually stayed underemployed 10 years out. And so it wasn't this kind of bump in the road. It was actually this kind of permanent rut of underemployment that affects everything, right? You're earning on average $10,000 less per year than your friends who are appropriately employed. You are not developing those really important professional networks, and you're not developing that social capital that you need in order to keep advancing in your career. So this is a real challenge. And we saw also what was really striking is that women were more likely to be underemployed than men. We had 1 out of 3 men starting off their careers underemployed, 1 out of 2 women starting off their careers underemployed.
So what do you say to a college graduate who is saying it's fine to hold out for that job that sort of fits my level, but I can't sit and wait while my
Mhm.
college debt piles up and I need to pay rent? How is there something is there counsel?
Yeah. So for certain kinds of majors, in particular, the ones that tend to see higher unemployment rates, which aren't always the ones that you expect, yes, those who go into computer science and engineering have an easier time kind of making it into that higher level job. But communications majors also do fare really well in the labor market. Meanwhile, bio and chem majors have a challenge because the expectation is that you need to go on to grad school in order to make that major work for you. So part of it is that your majors do matter in terms of signals to a future employer. But if that doesn't mean that you have to suddenly switch to a more career-oriented major. What it means is that you have to understand what signals a future employer might be demanding. And you, unfortunately, we're in this time period where employers have gotten very demanding about work experience or expectations about what kinds of SaaS applications a new hire might be able to wield. And we don't actually teach any of these kinds of skills in our traditional education format. So some of these things we actually have to start to identify and talk to people. Again, it's this idea of exposure. How do we learn more about where we think we want to go? And maybe, if I want to go into journalism, I didn't realize that I need to learn all these IT skills in data visualization and web analytics and JavaScript even, because this is the way the field is turning. And so these are kind of skills I need to start to learn along the way. So where might I look? Do I go for a MOOC, right? Do I look at an open educational resource? There are these different opportunities that exist for us to find those signals so that we can properly embed them into our resumes so it flags it for a future employer. So even if we are a psych major, a history major, an English major, we do have that special piece of graphic design, data analytics, social media marketing, right? So that we can get our foot in the door.
So how do you, I mean, building, if you're, even if you're going to college or not, if you're in high school. So Shelly, what kind of career advice do you give to STEM students, or how do you recommend, and what do you recommend to students with an interest in liberal arts, and maybe education? Is there a way that you prepare them for this kind of dilemma, which they face a different version of in college?
Absolutely. And if I could tag on to something Michelle mentioned before about the underemployment, we also see that overly represented population of individuals with disabilities that are underemployed or unemployed. And we have found through CTE's high quality framework that we provide more access and equity into skills training. And so we can give them what we call occupational identity. they have a chance to really see themselves in these careers and be able to visualize a variety of careers that maybe they weren't aware of before because no one in their inner circle of friends or family has ever been in that career before. So when we meet with students and we're providing them opportunities for guest speakers to come in, and we're never aware that, as someone who's interested in animals, that there's jobs in the military specifically associated with that, and that has an opportunity for them. So really helping students from the very beginning be able to visualize a future path for them, regardless if they're looking at STEM or into the liberal arts. It's really important to do that. I think kind of touching on what Michelle said on how you advise based on that with your STEM kids, which are your CTE kids, sometimes it's a little bit easier to advise for that because they've already seen kind of their future path and they're taking classes that are directly related to that. And they're learning skills in current environment, because with our Association of Career Technical Education and Perkins funding that really touches on all of career technical education, it really says that we need to have advisory councils that tell us that we have the industry current curriculum, we have the industry current equipment to be working on. So these skills that they're getting now, they take with them into the job. So it's a little bit easier for them to visualize, but it's helping them realize the benefits of continuing down that path and taking advantage of all those opportunities. For someone that's maybe looking at more of a liberal arts area, it would be really seeing how they might explore some of the other programs out there for things like marketing and communications, or even a computer-based class, so that they have some skills to add to their toolbox, even in the liberal arts area, so that they can expand beyond maybe what they thought was their small window of career into a larger occupational look at that.
Mhm.
So following interest and passion, developing skills in high school is important. As you enter college, if you go to college, signaling with how you talk about your major. Michelle, can you help address with what are the sort of most sought after majors and skills in the 21st century economy so far? What are companies prioritizing, and how do you signal? I mean, do people care about master's degrees, or how else can you do that?
Yeah, so the good news is in the US, we have, I think it's over 967,000 unique education credentials out there flooding our education and labor markets. And so there's a lot of different kinds of certificates, certifications, different kinds of bundling of competencies. And I think what we're seeing now, especially in higher ed, is the need to create different sorts of stacks or specializations that people can use to signal. So as I talked about earlier, that kind of really extensive, extended, longer lifespan that we might anticipate, if we have to navigate through that, right? Even if we get 2 years of community college or 4 years, or 6 years of college education on the front end of that much, much longer work life, that in itself isn't going to sustain us. So we're going to need to kind of continuously get these sort of booster shots of education, right, along the way, where we're reskilling and retooling. And where are we going to go for those? What does that look like? Those are the kinds of things we are seeing now, educational institutions trying to think about building differently that aren't necessarily always wrapped up in a full-on degree, because many people who already have degrees don't necessarily want to go back for another, right? They just need that market signal. They just need to acquire that competency. They need to feel like they understand that new platform or technology to feel kind of fluent in their day-to-day work. And so this is the work ahead, as you're seeing colleges and universities realizing, oh my goodness, the 18 to 24-year-old population that I was depending on to fill my seats are not coming as I expected, because the population is smaller. There's going to be a huge enrollment cliff in a few years. So how do I start to pivot to this lifelong learner? How do I change my structure, my systems, what I offer to meet their needs?
Awesome. What you're actually talking about is something that counselors and students don't necessarily think about, which is actually the college model and the way the college has always operated, depending on a certain number of people coming in with tuition. As we try to figure out from the student's perspective, what's the ROI for me as I sit thinking about college? If I can get a certificate in high school in a career pathway program in high school, and therefore I can get a job, unless I'm stuck underemployed, as you've pointed out, isn't that the best way? I'd love to have each of you talk a little bit about how you think, and specifically how you talk to your students about the ROI of college. Uh, as the model changes, as the costs of different kinds of credentials and so forth change, how do we talk about the ROI of college? Shelly, maybe I'll ask you to go first.
Perfect. I love that you're heading in that direction to talk about. And CTE, I think, is a great first step into that for families, because really in CTE, it's not about going career or college, it's career and college. Because we realize that in order to get to your career, you have to have some kind of training, whether it's in high school or beyond. And so many CTE programs now offer dual enrollment to be able to get a bunch of college credits in your back pocket before you ever head to college. It makes that learning more meaningful and gets you kind of a jump start on that investment, so that if they do decide to go the college route, they have several credits completed before they get there, which reduces that overall burden. Also, we do quite a bit on our end of trying to do what we call 90-30 programs, where we have worked really hard with our universities to build pathways for students that they can actually complete 90 of the 120 required college credits to get their four-year degree at a community college price, and only 30 of them at a university price. So ultimately, they're able to get 4 years of college for the price of one. And when they've done some dual enrollment for us, they also reduce that even further. So we're really trying to help them see that there's multiple pathways to get there and maybe try to reduce the cost in the long run. We also counsel them to know that historically, only about 30% of the jobs out there require a four-year degree, only 30 require a two-year degree. That means the remaining need some kind of a credential or specific training. So if you can get your actual credential as an esthetician while you're in high school, oh my goodness, you're so far ahead that if you decide to go to classes to maybe say get a business degree so that you want to open up your own business, you've already got the cost of that education and training for your particular field of aesthetics under your belt for next to nothing. And that means you can save a little bit towards that next degree if you want to get towards that business too.
Michelle, help us understand better about what Shelly just talked about in terms of credentials. It's not as simple as a major, or it's not as easy as or as obvious as a college course, or is it?
Now, I think it's more complex here, and I'm glad you're asking this question on ROI, because I think it is oversimplified when we tend to kind of debate this. I think one thing as we move into this kind of really uncertain world of work ahead, and trying to think about how do we access the right kinds of skills training and human skills development along the way, we actually all, even if we're going into college or we've graduated from college or we're far from college, we get to all be savvier shoppers of higher education. And we get to ask really tough questions of these educational providers, because for a very long time, the status quo has been sufficient. There's been no urgency and no push to change because the business model has been working just fine. But as we try to figure out where we go, where is the right place to skill up, we get to ask our universities and our learning providers and our CTE providers, hey, how do you approach problem-based learning? Because I want to be an amazing problem solver. How are you cultivating me to be the best problem solver in the world? You can ask them what their underemployment rates look like. You can ask them what kind of jobs their graduates retain, what kind of debt load do they have, right? Are they able to pay it off after they graduate? And then how do their programs actually help me translate my skills into the language of the labor market? And how do I know that you're going to be able to connect me to the right work-based learning opportunities and internships and apprenticeships and co-ops, so that when I leave, I'm going to have a real solid footing and an ability to just sort of transition much more seamlessly into that next role. So we get to ask these tough questions. It's kind of amazing, right? When you think about it and how we consume goods and services today. When we go on Amazon, even if I'm buying a $9 computer cable, I'll read, a few reviews of that $9 cable, and maybe there's 1,000 reviews of it, right? When we're making these huge purchases of these services, we need to ask these really tough questions, but we need to also understand that it's not just how much money am I going to make after this, but how is this actually going to develop me into that adaptable, nimble thinker of the future?
Wow, great. I actually really think that's important. That has to do with a real advocacy for your own skills, an understanding of where you stand, an understanding of what you're really after, and an advocacy for that. How do you help? And back to Shelley, how do you help students find the alternative pathways, not just in the schools, but also beyond the schools that they can trust? Do they go to boot camps? Are there uh, online providers that you recommend? How does that work?
It's a great question. And the hard part is a lot of it is very individualized, because if someone wants to skill up and maybe add a skill such as something in an Excel suite or something along some IT security platform, sometimes you can find a credential, a certificate online or in a program that's pretty easy. But a credential is a lot harder to obtain that easily. They're more often from trusted entities that are a little bit more brick and mortar or have a very robust online system, but they aren't usually short term. Most credentials are a long-term investment of at least many months, if not at least a year, to get that credential under your belt. That's a strong credential that is a must-have for a job, such as kind of going back to hairstyling and aesthetics. That's a credential that if you don't have that, you're not allowed to work in that field. You can later go back on and get other skill sets, learning how to do particular extra skills in that area. And those are sometimes professional development type things through trusted learners that are associated with different curriculums. So we help them be able to identify some of those trusted platforms to work with. And then others, we really look at things like going on and searching job descriptions to see what kind of credentials and certifications they're looking for in that career field, not only in the right now job that they want, but that future job. And then help them through our career services teams to look at where we can find those credentials from a reputable source.
Got it. So a lot of this boils down to something that I think is probably not only difficult, but something we don't necessarily even do that much, which is helping students figure out what they're really interested in and helping students figure out how good are they at that, whatever that is. I think we have to ask them questions sometimes. When have you thought the hardest and loved it? When have you been challenged in a way that you didn't know what the answer was, but figured it out? And how do you find places that allow you to do that again? Isn't that a potential pathway to growth? I'm making things up, and of course, as you have just said, Shelley, there are very clear, sometimes required hairstylist or other credentials. What else is there? What kind of assessments can you help people find to really sort of sort the world a little bit so that I can figure out what I want? Where should I be looking for reviews or reviewed programs or colleges?
And were you looking to Michelle or I to respond to that?
Well, actually, I really want to hear from both of you, but
Okay.
Shelley, I'll ask you to go first.
Okay. We're very fortunate in some sense, and it's almost hard in some others, that schools are really heavy on assessments of all different kinds. So students have the opportunity to kind of walk in this path a couple different ways. So there's things like that you hear about from the military, the ASVAB, which is actually one of the few ones that on a high school level we see consistently that is really an aptitude based rather than a self-report. And with ASVAB, they can mark a box that they want to or don't want to be contacted by the military. So it doesn't commit them to that. But it actually tests aptitude in a variety of areas that maybe they didn't realize that they didn't have a strength in before. And then it also relates to what kind of jobs are in that field based off of that. That's one of my absolute favorites because it is aptitude. But it's also important to get a sense of their self-report of what they like, what they feel they have strengths in, and then to be able to do that. There are so many providers for that. Most schools now are moving to some kind of a portfolio system where there are surveys within it, and that gives that great feedback on what kind of careers would be related to that. There's several brands out there, and I don't want to necessarily name one brand over another because it's really a choice of that school district, but there's so many platforms that you can do that. And then there's a lot of online ones that you can do on your own time outside of that, that you can just go on and really see what kind of skills do I feel I have? Where do I want to grow those skills? Because with any of these kind of things, whether it's the aptitude test under ASVAB or some of these other things, it's a right now thing. Doesn't mean that if your score is a little bit lower in this area that you can't grow that. That just means that's where you need to invest that interest and that learning into. And so I think it's a great way to look at it is, it doesn't mean you can't do that. It means what skills or training do I need to take on in order to head in that direction?
Yeah, I love can I just jump on in here just 'cause
Please,
I'm just also
please.
thinking, Shelly, about what you were saying earlier, about envisioning a way forward, right? Like envisioning a pathway, and also how most learners, at whatever stage, are going to the people closest to them in their informal social circles to ask them for advice on their careers. The challenge is that sometimes our informal social circles have no awareness of those opportunities, right? The plethora of pathways that actually exist out there. We just don't know. We have no idea. We've never been exposed to them. And so one of the challenges we've particularly seen with first gen learners is kind of a real inability to understand, or envision a pathway, because they haven't been maybe necessarily exposed to that whole variety of the gamut of opportunities out there. And so one of the really exciting things that's happening now is, with all of the big data that we're handling and trying to make sense of and parsing, there's a lot of different kinds of platforms out there that are using algorithms to help us as humans, because this is a challenge not just for first gen learners, but just all of us. We have trouble envisioning creative adjacent domains for ourselves, right? We don't know how our skills maybe adapt into totally different or seemingly different domains. But these AI platforms are now helping us kind of put in some of the nuggets from our resume, right? We're working at this particular store, and we can say, oh, actually, I have these competencies in budgeting, managing a team, right? And I'm starting to articulate these different pieces of who I am and that fuller profile of myself. And what it does is it begins to show now, there's a variety of these platforms that do this now, where me, as Shelly or Rob or Michelle, I'm 60% of the way there towards being a human resources manager. I'm 85% of the way there towards becoming a systems network analyst. I didn't even know these jobs existed, right? But now I'm kind of intrigued because I'm really almost nearly there in this realm. I kind of want to learn more about it, and what skills do I need to acquire in order to get moving in that direction, and what do those jobs look like? There are these really interesting kinds of skills gap analyzers that are helping us flesh out fuller profiles of ourselves and articulate our own skills so that we can begin to get more creative about those ways forward.
By the way, I want to point out that some of the direct recommendations about most explored career assessments are in the downloadable guide that goes along with this session. As Shelly said, we really are not trying to push one or another. And in fact, assessment, in some cases, many people at school say, oh my gosh, another assessment. Why? I don't want another assessment. But in fact, I think we have just heard that this is very different, because it has everything to do, almost nothing to do with, do I have enough score to qualify for a grade or something like that. In fact, it has everything to do with how close am I to accomplishing the goal. And the assessment has a kind of a wholly different character or different meaning almost for students. Um, I'd love to hear both of you talk a little bit about what kinds of other resources beyond the school counselor and beyond the school that students really need to begin to use. Michelle, you touched on this, and so I'll ask you to go first, because you talked about, even using tricks like we do for ratings, so for things that we're going to buy. Where else can we go? Where else can we find programs? Not every college is trying even some of this. Some colleges are trying a lot of this. How do we find that out?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's helpful to look at job postings of jobs that intrigue us, because we'll be able to see some of those signals flagged by the employer and what it is that they're demanding of us. And oftentimes there are specific kinds of applications that we just have to be familiar with. And some of the big ones today, right? We have to have a little bit of knowledge of what cloud computing is, right? Or a little bit of understanding of what cybersecurity is or what machine learning is. we can look at those job postings to begin to kind of parse out, oh, interesting, all of these job postings are actually asking for these same skills. Maybe I need to actually look into where I might acquire those. And the good news is some of these different technology companies are actually beginning to offer fairly low cost certificate programs that teach you these different kinds of, especially technical skills. One of the hardest things that's going to be for us to find for ourselves are those short burst training opportunities that really help us develop our human skills, because we actually do need to practice and deepen our human skills. It's not like something that's just innate within us. Those don't really exist yet for working adults, and so I'm curious to see how these solutions evolve over time. Um, Sorry, I kind of lost track of where I was going, Rob. What were you asking me? Oh, other resources, right?
Right.
Shelly, why don't you jump in and then I'll think of what the other thing was.
Absolutely. I think Michelle's hit very well on ways to find formal training type things to do. But I think one of the really amazing ways is to possibly look at doing some volunteering or some job shadow and things of that nature of different areas that interest you. So if you're interested in maybe working in the veterinary field, whether that's in a vet assistant, vet tech, or a vet position, to be able to go volunteer or work a part-time job or do even a job shadow experience there and find out the variety of the career paths you can go down that, and talk to people that are working in those jobs and find out what credentials did I find helpful, which ones really did nothing for my job or for my advancement in my job, and get that real world application and have that chance to maybe even go interview people, especially if you're still in high school. They let education happen. They let people in the door to do those kind of interviews and job shadows and things of that nature. And luckily in CTE, we have a lot of those kind of things built in with interns and externships and job shadow opportunities and work-based learning environments, so that students can kind of do that investigation and really ask those difficult questions of, did this thing mean anything to your career or not? And if so, where do I go get that? And find out from some people that are really living it in the moment, because that's incredibly relevant over maybe what we are hearing from some online source that said, hey, this is a really good thing to do, because you never know. Just a straight internet search sometimes.
Michelle, do you want to chime back in, or?
I was just going to maybe tailor comments, kind of connected to our earlier question of is college for everyone? Is college worth it, right? Is this kind of the way we need to think about it? But for those who maybe are in high school and are thinking about going directly into the workforce, one other consideration to make is to think about an employer who really kind of takes the long view on your skills development. This is something that we also get to be pickier about as we choose the right jobs for ourselves. We get to be picky about what our organizations are promising us. And we get to ask them questions about internal advancement, internal mobility. How do I actually gain the skills to keep moving up? And do they help me learn those skills on the job? This is something that the U.S. has been just so delinquent in over the last 40 years in particular. We've really disinvested from training our existing workforce. But I think we're seeing today with the Great Resignation, with the pandemic challenges, that employers are going to have to kind of take more of the onus on here of skilling up their workforce. And so there are ways to ask these questions in interviews, right? Are you actually going to help me build these skills for these emerging jobs? And you can actually verify, within the company, you can look pretty easily on LinkedIn to see, hey, for all these people who've been at that company, have they actually been able to get promoted, to move, right? Or to try out different kinds of areas. You can tell these things in terms of whether or not a company truly believes that their people are their most valuable asset.
Well, I think that's a really wonderful insight, and kind of I don't mean to unfairly characterize it, but I do think that we need to encourage our students to take that advocacy, to actually think hard about the employment that they are going to accept, not just that they're seeking, because it's what they want, but in fact, am I right for that? And in fact, are they right for me?
Mm-hmm.
And that developing that confidence is something that's potentially really important. I wonder if you have several questions have sort of boil down to the same one, which is what are the top 5 skills that I really need? And how do I get them? If I'm not getting them in high school, how do I get them outside of high school? If I am getting them, how do I build them? And if I'm choosing a college to really help me do the right thing. So in a way, what we're looking to, perhaps we have the 2 slides that we've already seen, which is one is a list of employability skills and the other is a list of human skills. Can you speak, each of you, and Shelly, I'll ask you to go first in terms of employability skills. Can you highlight what you really think you spend the most time or what you think is the most important for people to develop, for students to develop in high school and as they go forward?
Absolutely. In our experience in working with the variety of employers that we work with and the different career fields, we've really found the strongest areas that they want are that good communication, problem solving, critical thinking, to have some leadership ability, and huge pieces teamwork. And sometimes that's something that's missing in typical education settings if we don't make an intentional effort to build those particular skills as a huge set for students. So we really want to make sure that as students are walking out our doors with that cap and gown and heading to whatever's next in front of them, because these skills will serve them well, whether they go on to college or a career, or if they're doing a path to both, because you're going to need those to excel in any environment.
Love it. And in fact, some I've heard in college talk about how, in fact, sports even involves things like really being a demonstrable exhibition of teamwork, of ability to work with others and literally play well with others as we need to in the workforce. Michelle, can I ask you to weigh in?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap, right? When we're talking about these quote unquote soft skills, these are just different names that we use to kind of encapsulate what we're talking about. But probably, I would say, it seems like probably the questions that are sort of crystallizing around the same idea are probably asking us, well, tell me the hard skills that I need to know. But we keep kind of focusing on these broader skills, and they are vastly important, even for STEM areas, right? Super heavy science areas. You need that person who can communicate really well and serve as a liaison between the engineering and the business side, right? You need these people who can translate even within a company. You need people with great self-awareness, right? People who understand how they're coming off, how the cultural competencies that they're exhibiting or not exhibiting, right? Are they listening well? Are they able to give and receive feedback well, right? These are really seemingly simple things, but there's probably the greatest sources of friction in the workplace today, right? And so how do we begin to think about this? And then finally, I think just the way to think about the skill, because it really matters what industry domain we're talking about. So we can't just sort of rattle off 5 skills specifically. But the one
Yeah.
that cuts across every single industry is just this larger idea of range or systems thinking or problem-based or problem solving. So I love the book by David Epstein called Range, where he talks about how it's really important for us to stretch across disciplines and display analogical thinking in terms of being able to take an idea from one area and apply it in a totally new way in a different area, right? In order to deal with the challenging and wicked and not rules-based problems that we are all facing in our work, we have to be able to flex and do this kind of systems thinking. We have to do this kind of problem solving. And that means that we really understand what it means to be interdisciplinary in the way we think about things, right? How do I take something from that English class and use it to solve this problem in physics or chemistry, right? Because there's actually something really critical that I can deploy here. And we're not used to doing that. And so that is, that's the core of all of this, is how do we become, again, the best problem solvers we can?
And again, how do we show that so that we display that we can do that? I'm going to ask what might be the final question, which is if you can think of, or you can suggest a question that counselors can ask students themselves in order to help them really think this through. What is the kind of way to sort of help them really get involved, engaged in this. I must remark that each of you has spoken about not a formal program or a specific credential or no specific either. Certainly assessments are important. Certainly programs and leaders and teachers are important. Certainly schools and credentials are important. But actually, you've each mentioned internships or externships or job experience, the place where you are actually in the workplace, the place where you are actually showing up for work and doing the right things, doing the things which show that you can hold a job. I do think that's an important sort of test or in the medal. But I do. Is there a question that you could recommend for counselors to use with students as they try to really inspire them to figure this out with them? Shelly, perhaps I can ask you to go first.
I would say my favorite question for that is asking them what problem do they want to solve? As they're figuring out their career path and where they're going. Is most of our generation that we're working with now in schools really want to be involved in something the bigger than themselves. And so if we can phrase it to them instead of what do you want to do when you grow up or something of that nature, it's what problem do you want to solve? Because most of them want to give back in some way. So if we get it to what problem they want to solve, we can then expand their thinking to all these different career paths that may fit in that. And then we reverse engineer that to what kind of education or training do you need? And what are some really good experiences you could engage in while you're in high school, whether it's through community service, sports, different things that you can get involved in to help really check out that path and build that resume of a strong, well-rounded individual heading down that path.
I love that. I think that really connects well with this idea that came out of the D School at Stanford on purpose learning. The director there was asking, what if we had a school of hunger, right? What if we had a school of poverty? And you got to just say, like, I'm raising my hand because I want to solve that problem. And in the midst of that kind of larger global challenge that you're wrestling with, you learn why these different disciplines matter, right? That is purpose learning. That's kind of starting with your why. And I think that is really critical. Another way that you can probably suss that out from different organizations that you're considering going to in terms of the colleges or universities out there is to ask them about if they offer any kind of design thinking learning, right? Because this is the kind of work that exists in all fields, right? When we're trying to solve a problem, we actually have to empathize. We have to begin with empathy and interviews and truly understanding what the pain points and barriers are. And then we begin to kind of prototype and, design and iterate and refine and then do this over and over again, right? This is the design process in all the ways in which we solve problems. So one way to think about it is I think a lot of really interesting kind of forward-leaning schools are starting to lead with design thinking in more and more programs, which I think is fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you both for many, many great ways of thinking about this, challenges and experiences, the language that we need to start using. And I'm hoping that everyone in the audience has enjoyed this program as much as I have. Thank you in the audience very much for watching CGN July Careers, Skills for Your Future. And thank you especially our featured experts, Michelle Weise, Shelly, Thome. A reminder that this is the second part of a 3-part series. The link in the chat is to part 1, and also on December 1st, we'll be focusing on jobs and how to find role models and envision your dream job. Guests for that program are Mike Mariner, who's co-founder and president of Road Trip Nation, and Linda Calhoun, who's founder and CEO of CareerGirls.org. If you want to share this episode, a link will be sent out within the next couple of days. Thank you much for watching, and good night.
Thank you for watching CGN Live Career, Skills for Your Future from College Guidance Network. We'd love to get your feedback about this episode in a brief survey. By filling out the survey, you'll have the chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card. CGN School is the first video library for counselors to build capacity with their families, featuring only nationally recognized college and career experts with content translated into multiple languages. We've dropped a link to a brief video in the chat. See and hear directly from counselors who are now letting good content do more of the work. Go to collegeguidancenetwork.com to request a demo. Our next CGN Live career program is on Thursday, December 1st at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It's called What's Your Idea of a Great Job? Experts who have heard the personal stories of thousands of happy professionals will share advice for finding role models and landing a career that you love. Today's discussion will be posted to share with your friends and colleagues later this week with caption translations in several languages. Thanks again for watching, and good night from College Guidance Network.